Coverage of the passing of Pope Francis continues this morning.
Western Mass News reporter Chris Pisano has more on the life and the legacy of the pontiff.
Even though Pope Francis may have been based more than 4,000 miles away in Vatican City, his presence here in our area is undeniable. Recently, with word that the head of the Roman Catholic Church was in poor health and has now passed, the faithful of Western Mass prayed. From parishioners,
thoughts and prayers are with him. The Holy Spirit is guiding and directing him.
All the way up to the Bishop of Springfield.
I'm remembering him each day in my rosary and in all my little moments of sacrifice and calling him to mind.
Pope Francis was a well-traveled pope, having visited some 6 countries across the globe during his papacy, including here in the U.S. in 2015. And it was that unwavering commitment to bring his message of peace to the world that endeared him to many.
I think that the Pope is an untiring voice for those who have no voice, for those who are most marginalized in our society, those who are most easy to forget, and he's always stood up for them and called the church to remember that we have to be courageous in speaking for those most vulnerable among us.
In fact, he engendered so much love and admiration locally, the largest Catholic high school in Western Mass bears his name. After the Cathedral High building was destroyed by a tornado in 2011, it was announced in 2015 that the school would merge with Holyoke Catholic in Chicopee to form a new regional Catholic school. A group of students and school officials chose to rename it after the Holy Father, Pope Francis High School, later changed to Pope Francis Preparatory School. A lasting and local legacy for a boy who grew up in Argentina and eventually reached the pinnacle of his faith on the global stage.